Welcome to Hip Replacement, the conversation between generations X, Y, and Z. I'm your host, Ben Dietz.
And I'm your host, Kyle Raymond Fitzpatrick. Every week we get together and talk with guests from Gen Z and beyond to try and understand just exactly what's going on in the current moment.
It's because we're talking about these generations.
All right, welcome to another episode of Hip Replacement. This is actually the second episode, and we are joined by a friend of mine, a Substack mutual, a London glamour girl, someone who I love and is on my sort of mood board of modern inspiration, or contemporary inspirations, let's say. Georgia Graham of Threads of Conversation, the Substack and podcast. How's it going, Georgia?
It's good. I love that I got called a glamour girl. Do you know what a glamour girl is in the UK?
No, but let me know.
It means a topless model, like a glamour model. Is like, or like a page 3 or page 6. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay.
But it is quite funny because in another life I did modeling, and there was another model who was also called Georgia Graham, who definitely was a glamour girl. So it was quite funny. People say, I looked up your modeling pictures, and I'd be like, which ones you find? No, sorry, Ben, I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say my wife is English, so of course I'm familiar with the term, and I thought that was sort of a funny intro. But now we know it's based in some
Ben's
sort
wife's
of
a glamour model too. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
In an alternate universe, I knew what that meant, and that was a part of the bigger brain that was happening, but no, I didn't. But here we are. Thank you for joining us, Georgia. We're super excited to chat. Technically, Georgia is a millennial as well, but a little bit on the other end of the spectrum is of me. I think I'm solidly in the middle, and you're just left of that center, I guess, or right of whatever. You're on the younger side of that.
You're almost a Z, Georgia?
Yeah.
I'm almost a Z, and people do mistake me for a Z sometimes, which is very flattering. I don't know if it's my spirit or my skincare regime, but something's working.
Seriously, whatever works. Well, to Gen Z, Ben is going to kick things off with with the first subject, which is about Gen Z micro-retirement.
I was going to say, I just wanted to run this past you as experts of both the sort of vernacular of the internet and of young people generally. So Bloomberg has a story about how Gen Z is rebranding sabbaticals. In other words, like periods between work engagement, whether that's sponsored by a company or whether that's, not, as micro retirements. And as someone who is approaching actual retirement, I'm interested to know about these micro retirements. Is this what the kids are doing? I'm a little lost by this, I have to confess.
First off, can I just say I don't believe you're actually approaching retirement. I don't believe that.
I will qualify for AARP in July, so I'll just let you know that.
Okay. Sure.
And Georgia, do you have insurance?
Great.
Anyway.
I actually think I'm very qualified to talk on this topic because it seems that I'm the only one in the conversation who has actually already had a micro retirement. I like to stay ahead of the trend.
But tell us about it, yeah.
But I, as I mentioned, I used to do modeling, and I retired when I was 25. So that was my micro retirement. Yeah, in terms of Gen Z sort of hopping on this trend and making it more of a thing, as opposed to just a sort of a random episode in my own life. What do I think about it? Kyle, you go first. And then
Well, I was going to say, to me, I could be wrong. And I know we talk about this, I feel like every time, or we will talk about this every time, is that it, in a lot of ways, I think micro retirement, sabbatical, it's the same thing. But I think on top of that, I think a bigger thing, and I feel like I see this a lot on LinkedIn, is you go on someone's profile and it's they took a sabbatical or they took a micro retirement, whatever you call it. And I was I'm not being shady. It was if you were unemployed, you can just say that. That's okay.
Yeah.
I think it's a bit of a rebranding of an economic reality. And I love that. I think it speaks to a sort of, some people's positionality where they can be well, I'm just turning this lack of a job into a eat, pray, love moment. But I do think at its core, the idea of I think calling it micro retirement is silly, but here we are. This is just the state of media. But I do think sabbaticals, at least in the sort of US, I don't know about the UK, maybe Georgia, you have insight into that. Taking a sabbatical, I think, should be more encouraged and blah, blah, blah. Because as someone who did not take a gap year between anything, I would love that. But like,
do either of you know any companies that offer sabbaticals? The only one I can think of is Nike, and you have to be at Nike for, I think, 10 years. Maybe it's 7, but it's either 7 or 10, but that's the only one I can think of.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing just that I had forgotten to say and I just remembered is that it might also have something to do with the fact that people are working so much longer. Because I guess if you're coming into the workforce and you're like, I'm going to work until I'm 80, you're probably going to take all the breaks you can because it's a marathon. It's not that it was ever fully a sprint, but it felt like more of a sprint than it does now. So that could also be a part of the conversation and the sort of...
Well, I was going to say, like, yeah, I feel like that is the same thing that dovetails into the Nike thing, is because, like, I don't think there are less places like Nike now. I've worked at one place that did have a sabbatical. You got like a month off, and I know a few friends who've gotten like a month off for like being someplace at 5 years plus. But like those sorts of things, if they exist, like that's all that exists, because like, again, at least in the States, at least with big companies like a Nike, like they don't have things like pensions anymore. So like you're not really getting this sort of rewards for your employment in the ways that you used to. And like sabbatical, if they exist, are something in between. And like to your point, Georgia, like you're right. Like most of us will be working until X time in our life, and like there isn't space to sort of be like, all right, let me take a breather. Like, no.
Yeah. The thing that I thought was interesting about it, and I wonder, is that this Bloomberg article poses it as the sort of thing that employers should offer as micro retirements, which strikes me as odd, because when you retire from something, you leave it, in my association. And I don't know whether that's just me and previous definitions, or whether that's a more commonly held thing. But I just find it odd that they would sort of advocate for that as being a corporate term.
I don't know. Maybe
just call it sabbatical. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, it just sounds like a rebrand of a sabbatical.
But I think that also gets to your point, Georgia, about like not like, if they call it micro retirement, then they're assuming you're never going to retire. I think that was like I think that's what they're getting at.
I see. That's interesting. Okay, now I understand it. Because
like 10 micro retirements make up a full retirement, which is also a synonym for just death.
Yeah, and you're not paid during any of the micro retirements, which is like, well,
you're not paid in death either, man.
Yeah, well, also fair too.
Oh my God. All right. Okay. Now, see, that does, I mean, I think that's very dark, but since Severance is still on right now, I guess we can, indulge it. Okay. All right. I get that. That kind of rebranding brings me to one of the other stories I wanted to share with you guys, which was this KFC ad from the UK, Georgia, your hometown, or not hometown, your home country, where they are celebrating a chicken and egg worshiping cult, and they're trying to attract young audiences to it with a kind of a bizarre film. And this article in The Drum talks about how they don't care whether it's controversial or not. I don't know. I just found the whole thing sort of weird and notable. And so I wanted to just say, have you joined the chicken cult?
I joined the chicken cult. I've only recently become what I call a lapsed vegetarian, which is like sort of a gentle slide back.
So you have joined the chicken cult.
So yeah, chicken was the first frontier, but I still not quite on the like full sort of fried chicken and chips thing. But I am very aware of it. And yeah, I don't know. When I saw the ad, I was thinking about how I feel like now ads, particularly those targeting younger people, but they're becoming a bit more like cinematic now. I feel like that's the way that people are trying to achieve cut through, is making these like strange little films or really kind of bizarre. It's almost, we've come back to remember the Cadbury Gorilla advert, like the randomness of
classic,
that kind of high production advertising.
I was going to say late 90s
thinking behind it. Yeah.
Well, I guess from my standpoint, having been in many of these conversations over the course of time, you one of the reasons that you pitch high production value is because it's the only way to justify the budget that then pays for the rest of the agency's operation, right? Like you can't go in and say, hey, we're going to do a bunch of man on the street TikTok things, and then be like, and here's our,
right?
Yeah, exactly. So the way to justify it potentially is to go, oh, we're in this chicken and egg worshiping cult. We're building a world. And in that world, every element is commoditizable in some way, like the Yeezy-esque outfits that the cult members are wearing. We're going to sell those on the website. And the special edition lake battered chicken we're going to sell it. You know, I mean, it's like there's a way to apply commercial rationale to all of it, but the thing that I don't get is why that part of it and the joining the cult of it is specifically a Z thing.
I would say that, like, you know, international KFC, for lack of better words, is a bit more unhinged. So like it definitely fits into that sort of like vibe. Like the KFC España, like if you go on their social, it is just like dank, bottom of the barrel, like fried memes. It's hysterical. I don't know how they sell that through or if it sells anything, but like it's speaking to this sort of like brain rotted Gen Z thing. So like it's funny that this sort of cult thing and outside the Yeezy sort of aesthetic is being applied to this commercial, because like I think that commercial is actually trying to appeal to probably millennials and older, because I don't think it's going to appeal to Gen Z, because I think Gen Z, to the point of not watching television, maybe not even encountering that ad in full anywhere, like it's not necessarily for them. It could have been, you know, to the point of agencies, an excuse is just make a mini movie and do whatever and make money. But like I think that it feels more like, you know, I think you just mentioned this, Georgia, like this sort of like puppy monkey baby thing from like, well, who did that? I forgot who did that ad, but like that, it felt like that ad, that sort of thing. And like, it felt specific to another era that I don't know existed even 10 years ago. Like it seemed like a sort of Tim and Eric sort of thing. And like, that's great. But like, to me, this seems like, you know, a breath before like KFC's like, okay, we don't have the money for this shit anymore.
The
to
last
me.
gasp.
Yeah, because like that don't exist.
I guess also it's like people are really wondering, because now you get, you know, before it was like, oh, you just turn on your TV and then everyone will see the ad, but now there's so many hundreds of different streams of like consumer attention. Maybe it's part of like a bigger strategy, basically like test what works. I don't know. It's like,
well, I was gonna say, like, because this happened with the Super Bowl, and I feel like it happens increasingly with every Super Bowl, is almost like appointment viewing for advertisements, which is like awful. But like that, it's to that point of what you're saying, Georgia, is like that, like this being a sort of mini movie, like I'm gonna go boot up my YouTube and watch the KFC mini movie. Like I could see Gen Z doing that, but I wouldn't see them encounter the ad in the wild. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I guess it's that thing of like trying to create enough of like a buzz and cult following that people will actually like look up the ad.
Which is never a good tactic for advertising, guys. Just putting it out there. Like it's, yeah, I mean, you can capture lightning in a bottle from time to time, but it is
not. However, there is a.
Do you want to come to my ad viewing party?
Yes,
I do. Actually.
No, but I'm not. I'm not. I kid you not. Is that like like being on Twitter around the time of Super Bowl, like there was a sort of like buzz around like this ad's gonna drop, and people would talk about it. So like I think that idea is like, I think, and we know kind of historically with how sort of Gen Z behaves and sort of the neo-boomerism of it all, is that like they do show up for the dropping of an advertisement. Like they show up for a dropping of a music video, which is like, no, like that, it's not MTV. Like you had to show up on MTV at this time or you wouldn't see it. YouTube, it's going to replay.
Right.
It's going to replay. Forever. Like you don't have to worry about it. So like, that's the funny thing is like, well, I show up on time for this ad. It's like, what?
I thought the Gen Z boomerism corollary, it was an interesting thing to bring up, and that actually allows us to jump over to the boom boom piece, Georgia, that you shared with us. But I did want to touch on one thing quickly before we went, because I think it's tied together. There's the piece this morning that Ted Gioia, the very much boomer writer out in the Bay Area, wrote about how James Bond can fix the crisis in masculinity, which I thought was a really fantastic premise of just, I mean, that's adult onset brain rot as far as I'm concerned. But I also think it's like really, it's sort of a funny thing. And essentially it's,
you know what made me laugh about, sorry, I didn't mean to, you finish what you were saying.
No. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, I mean, full transparency, I did skim read the article just before this recording, so I might have missed something. I did almost do Control F woman, but I was just like, you know what would make James Bond really radical? Make him a chick. Like,
yeah.
That was not suggested.
No, it was not. Although towards the end of, so I'll do your Précis human Control F situation. So the things that James Bond can do to fix the crisis in masculinity is A, stop womanizing, B, do hard things, C, essentially like stop being a frivolous IP product and instead be like a serious person. And all of which, fine, fair. But it was, I don't know. I like the idea that James Bond is going to fix the crisis in masculinity, to me was just so bizarre that
That
I had to flag
presupposes
it.
so many givens that just don't exist anymore. It's like
That's right.
it is assuming that people will show up and care for these sort of IPs like they used to, and that it has that much of cultural sway, and that like a single movie can sort of change the conversation around like male identity. I mean, like I think a good example is like, you know, looking at what happened within to the sort of Star Wars franchise and them sort of like really updating in a lot of ways, and like it just being met with the most like hateful worst men online, and like I would not see it going any other way for this,
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, I mean, Jar Jar Binks is a terrible character, but that's a whole
Exactly, yeah.
different discussion. Well, okay, so Georgia, to that end, like James Bond, in some respect, in a much more refined, much more sort of sophisticated cosmopolitan way, is an expression of a kind of boom boom mentality. So this boom boom is the framing of contemporary culture, the desires of contemporary culture by the writer Sean Monahan. And what he's essentially saying is like people want to be ostentatiously showy and put wealth or displays of wealth on blast because it's what makes them feel, I don't know what, significant or something in the current moment. What was it about the piece that Amelia Petrarca wrote in response that jumped at you?
I think it is just this return to kind of like 80s maximalism. Feel like millennials, like we were kind of a generation that were quite concerned with trying to do the right thing and sort of, I don't know, democratize things. And obviously, from my perspective, someone works in fashion, like that sort of element coming into play. And now it kind of, for me, I see it as born of this. I mean, especially in reference to Gen Z, this sense of nihilism where it's like, we can't change anything. Am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Of
Go
course.
ahead, swear all you
Everything is
want.
fucked. Like,
Yeah.
and so just get your bag, really, get your bag while you
Yeah.
still can and run with it. And also, it's sort of a sense of, well, if we can't change anything, then we might as well just enjoy all the stuff that feels good. And the stuff that feels good is shiny, is commercial, is that quick dopamine hit of, consumer culture, essentially.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Have you started to see evidence of this? Because I don't know. I mean, yes, there are the fashion campaigns and the particular sort of expressions of it, but I don't see it yet, at least not to the
Do you
extent that I.
mean where do you mean specifically? Like walking down
Well,
the
so
street?
sorry, like out in on the streets in New York, or at out at night, so on and so forth. I don't see the thing that's being described yet, except in places where it has always existed, like bottle service nightclubs and that sort of stuff. And I just wonder to what extent you're, seeing it on the streets of London or seeing it on the streets of Barcelona or whatever the case is.
No, I mean, that is a good point. And I suppose it's like, I always wonder, being in fashion and looking at that as a sort of somewhat a petri dish for culture, but also being like, is this just a separate petri dish? Like, does this actually relate to the wider culture? But I do, in terms of the, maybe less so the aesthetic of it, I wouldn't say, because it is quite a flashy aesthetic and people tend to dress quite casual. So I don't know if I'm necessarily seeing suddenly everyone acquiring this like very flashy vibe. But I think that in terms of an attitude, I do think that there is more of a sense of people feeling like, for example, the concept of selling out has kind of disappeared. That's not really a thing anymore.
100%.
There's not really, I mean, I work in the creative industries. There's not really a divide between art and commerce that much anymore. I think for even as audiences, when you see your favorite celebrity doing something that you maybe feel ethically like not aligned with, maybe that's Charlie doing the H&M collaboration, there's more of a sense of accepting it and being like, oh, well, she's just getting her bag. Do you know what I mean? Like, she did what she had to do. Yeah, slay girl kind of thing. And I feel like that's where I'm noticing this less of a visual aesthetic and more of a mood that is,
Okay,
yeah,
sure.
Kyle.
Well, I was going to say, to the point of the YSL show, and I feel like there was 3/4 of the shows that I saw were sort of this very 1980s aesthetic, very 1980s office work, not even working girl. It was very like Videodrome, Debbie Harry, very like that sort of 1980s femme fatale in an office who wears like a suit. Very that, which is kind of cool, kind of whatever. Very, I was going to say Arnold Palmer, but I meant Robert Palmer. Very that style.
It's very
Just like
Arnold
a
Palmer
drink.
too.
Yeah, like the drink. No, but like I feel like that aesthetic and the emergence of this aesthetic, this sort of boom boom, whatever you want to call it, is sort of meeting the moment retroactively, because I don't think that people are wearing that. Like, yes, office sign, whatever, and like I do see people sort of wearing the sort of blazer, smart, whatever, which isn't necessarily it, but it's going to sweep that up because, like, to your point, George, and I've felt this for months. I've talked to friends about this. Is that like we're in a very ideologically nice moment, like. It's Trump, Trump is in charge, and that sort of like gilded mindset, both as far as aesthetics, but as far as just like, I deserve cash and like Patrick Bateman, whatever. And even Gen Z's idolizing randomly of Patrick Bateman sort of speaks to this sort of, this ideology that has been sort of bubbling. And now I think fashion is sort of catching up to sort of give a visual vocabulary to people who are sort of expressing themselves this way. Because you might be, say, a rich MAGA person, and what they're saying is like, don't get this shit from Zara, buy it from us, because they're going to Zara now.
Yeah, I guess theory. Part of my question, part of my question was just about the idea of the cycle, right? Like, so when do we see that people sitting in their home offices with full, blazers and vests on, if at any point, and because I just like going out to the Sweet Green, not seeing it right now, and
no,
it might be coming, but I'm just not seeing it yet. That's all.
It is interesting though, you say that people sitting in their home offices, because I guess this is kind of tying together two things that we'll chat about today, which is this trend for like what they call corp core, which is the suits and sort of this slightly vintage office aesthetic.
Right.
So yeah, the idea of people sitting in their home office wearing a suit is a bit of an oxymoron, because I think there is some relationship between this and this back to work, back to the office mandate that lots of companies are rolling out, and sort of basically reducing work from home more and more and more and more. And I wonder as well if it is something to do, I don't know, is it some sort of conflation between, it's like almost like recession core as well, where people they've got work on the brain because everyone's worried about losing their job and they want to get their money and they're worried, and so everyone's like, better suit up and get back to work. I mean, I was chatting to a friend about the shows and seeing all these suits on the runway and stuff, and that's what they were saying. And yeah, so I feel like it's a strange conflation of two almost opposing things, where it's like flash your cash, but then also you're doing it because you're kind of worried about having cash and you might not have any.
Well, it speaks to the moment so well, and I think you're exactly right. Is that it's sort of like, dress for the job that you hope to keep, and also or get whatever. But like it's that paired with like
I think you're right.
But it's that paired with like sort of like conversations about micro retirement and shows like Industry and Severance, and like it very much is like work is on the mind, because work is so bad, we all know, and like it's increasingly sort of like dominating your life and giving you no rewards. Financial, yes, but like not even that much. Like we're in a state where sort of like that dominates everything. Like it's like it's you can't exist without work now. There used to be a time where you could live in a city and sort of have like a shitty job and still be able to pursue your whatever, and like no, you cannot live.
Which is what you wrote about this weekend with your No Second Jobs post. I wonder if this is a condition though of media anxiety about its future, and then therefore like a self-reflexive shining a light on media and the creative industries, and whether this actually happens outside of those, whether this is happening outside of those industries. Like, is banking concerned about what you wear to the bank beyond the sort of finance bro codes? Is it changing, or is that just like journalists are freaked out about AI, potentially with good reason, and so they're dressing for the jobs they wish to keep, as you said?
AI never looked this sharp.
That is true. That
God.
is true. Lovely. Yeah, we
Ugh.
haven't. This is we should have done a fit check at the beginning, Georgia, so that we
Oh
could
no,
have
I didn't mean
gone.
it about me. I just meant it hypothetically. Like that people are thinking when they're getting dressed up. It's like,
Well,
well,
for
AI
those
might take my job, but it'll never take my fit, kind of thing.
for those of you who are not watching this on Spotify or whatever, George is wearing a very fetching, let's call it liner type jacket.
Yeah.
Like looks like a quilted liner type jacket. So anyway,
Yeah. No, this is if I was gonna, yeah, sometimes I wear a suit to work, but it's more of a kind of ironic thing because I work in like, I don't know, industries where you really don't have to wear a suit. And if anything, it's more about looking really creative. So it's quite fun to sometimes wear a suit.
Right.
I did that when there was a year in which I wore a suit and tie to work every day when I worked at Vice because I was like actively playing against type. It was my
It's
job to
funny
go
you
out
say
of
that. Yeah, because I remember once me and some friends, we went to the Dazed Christmas party here in London. Of course, Dazed is like a very kind of young, edgy publication. And so you're like, oh, this is going to be a really cool party kind of thing. And their theme, I mean, always ahead of the trends, their theme was, it was like, corporate office party or something. So the idea was that everyone dressed as normie as possible. But it was the whole thing was so trippy because you're there and you're looking around and you're like, I'm meant to be at the coolest party in London and everyone looks so square. It was
that was before the drugs came out, and then
there were no drugs.
Oh, okay. Well, in any case, there were at the Vice parties. Okay, so there's that, but does the corpcore thing? I mean, there have been a bunch of think pieces / interrogations around severance, around industry, around corpcore, and boom boom and so on, that have venerated it as an aesthetic thing. And I guess from my experience, when that happens, it starts to bleed into people's home decor choices and so on and so forth. Are we going to see a lot of like Dieter Ramsization of our personal spaces coming up? And do you think that's something that Gen Z goes after?
I would say yes in ways. I mean, it's coming down the pipeline. I mean, if we're already seeing like a re-rise or a lusting after like glass bricks. So like there is, which, hey, I've been a long time glass brick stan. Bobby can tell you because he fucking hates them. And I think that there's something elegant and cheesy about them. Any glass brick I love. Too. I think a colored Georgia, glass brick, glam.
You want to weigh in on glass bricks, Georgia, just quickly?
These are the ones you build a wall with them, right? And then
yeah.
They kind of creates a bit of a, how do I feel about them? I don't know, I haven't seen them for ages.
Well, you're gonna start seeing them everywhere now. Thanks to hip replacement.
Yeah. When done right, they're really chic. Exactly. But like there's a form of modernism that really sort of expresses that, but like it's also done really poorly, obviously, which is why people like Bobby don't like it. But like I do think a lot of that sort of aesthetic is going to come back. And again, like this is so ridiculous. And it's like that time travel meme, like if I had a time machine, woman would go back and do this, but I would go back and be like, Bret Easton Ellis, like just don't write American Psycho, like, or write it and then go far left. Don't be like weird, almost kind of right. Because like that movie has become such a strange aspirational thing for like Gen Z, the aesthetic of it. And like to that point is like that sort of like high rise, glam, sparse. The residential version of the office siren is what it is. So like that has become a sort of like aspiring thing when it's like that's like a dungeon. You know that, right?
Well, it's a dungeon with Robert Longo paintings. So
sure.
I mean, Okay, so that then brings up another question for me. And Georgia, you highlighted this in one of the other article you sent, which was around participating in microtrends as a low status signifier. Talk about that a little bit, because I'm getting my head around essentially what all of that means.
Okay, so the video was from this, he's like a trend analyst or something on TikTok, and he was saying that, he thinks that microtrends are going to become a low status signifier because essentially what will become a status signifier is showing that you don't have to spend time online. And so spending time online and being locked into like the algorithmic wormhole will be a symbol of being sort of unwillingly chained to the machine. And I think that's interesting. I don't know if I agree with all of it, because I also think that micro trends, kind of like you were saying, does this boom boom aesthetic actually exist in real life, or is it just a figment of our sort of cultural imagination that we're using as a prism to talk about other stuff? Micro trends in terms of, it says luckily calmed down a bit kind of this year, but last year, it was sort of a sort of office siren, mob wife, cottage coastal grandma, and all this. But I don't know how many people actually dressed like that in real life, where they were like, oh, I've seen this TikTok and now I must go out and buy a whole new wardrobe to dress this way. Sorry, Kyle, you have something to say.
I was just gonna say, I think you're right, but I also think, again, like to the point of our age groups, I do think like the teens and the like maybe college kids, maybe mid-20s, were definitely doing it. Like I think Shein made a lot of money from being able to be like hashtag cottagecore on their website and really absorb a lot of that energy. And I think that's that. I think it's probably younger people with less money and ironically more time to actually source these things in responsible ways. But like, I think that was existing. And like, I think again, I think even Shein seeing a sales drop in the last year sort of is a response to this sort of becoming not as much of a thing in a way. Because I think that's sort of like where we saw a sort of clear cause and effect. Because I don't think people like us were doing it, obviously.
Yeah. And that brings us back around to one other story, which is the one about Hasbro, the toy maker, trying to target kidults as its, growth strategy, and the potential that the new Trump tariffs negatively affect that. Do we have any kidults on the call? Anybody here who would identify themselves as the portmanteau of kid and adult?
I don't think so. I know what it is, though.
Can I confess that, directly here in front of me, I have some kidult coded objects. I'll show you one.
I was like, is it a Funko Pop? Because I'm going to think.
No, my God, that would be ridiculous. No. So this is for those who can't see it, this is a collectible figure made by A-Life, the streetwear store, for one of their early limited edition packs. It was actually made by Echo Unlimited and A-Life Creative. It's the surprise pack, and this is number 308 of 1997. So this is in a certain way, it's an art edition, but it's also a plastic toy, and it doesn't serve any purpose. And to my mind, it just like kind of is there as a totem of my early days in New York when I would go to A-Life and just, freak out because it was super cool. It seems strange to me that you would target your whole business around that, but there's an inherent logic to it when we are swaddled in sweatpants and treated like to a YOLO world, and IP franchises never die. Like, there's a logic.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about like Barbie, that was like a huge blockbuster, and that was a film about a toy, and mostly was attended by adults, I would say, probably more so than children.
I can attest that. I mean, I saw it twice, and it was a test. It was with other adults, also children, but
kidults. I mean, you take your egg toy with you. Okay, guys, don't forget to bring your egg toy.
Yeah,
we can talk about it after.
I brought my egg. Well, it was the only. It's like that song Fish Heads. I didn't have to pay to get the egg in, so it was good.
I was going to say, wait, Jordan, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say, Kyle, I feel like you have written about this a lot in your newsletter, which is this kind of what we were talking about at the beginning of the call, which is that the sense that because economically, socially, the sort of markers of adulthood are changing or disappearing. So people are having kids later or not at all. People are not getting married, but people are not buying property. And so this creates this sort of like space-time continuum of like adolescence into adulthood, but never like proper adulthood, which I suppose blurs the boundaries of other stuff. Like, what does it mean to behave as an adult if you don't have any responsibilities? Like, do you need to be like sensible? And maybe we do play with toys. And certainly, I mean, I used to work for a big retailer, and like one of their biggest brands, or the things that I know they sold a lot of, were Jellycat toys, which are just like super popular. Which I have to say, I think some of the Jellycat toys are quite cute. I don't own them, but I'm not completely anti.
Yeah, well,
but if you got a limited edition Jellycat version from one of your iconic fashion brands, you would happily take it.
Well, it's funny you said that, because when you were talking about this initially, I was thinking about the fact that I guess in fashion, there's a lot of these, fashion show invites. They're kind of toys. You get this strange object. Everyone keeps them as a sort of memorabilia, and maybe if they're really good, you put them on a shelf or something. They're kind of, it's the same as your egg.
Yeah. I mean,
it's a toy that means something to you, but is essentially kind of a
totally. Ben, when you showed that egg, it made me think of just like mischief shit, which
me
is like
too.
that's exactly what it is. And like, well, they're all sort of related. Like mischief is sort of redefined the kidult thing, and then like Funko Pop, whatever thing is a sort of echo of like the mid-aughts like edition toys and cause and whatever. But like one thing that I think is really sort of funny to your point, Georgia, is that like adulthood now for a lot of millennials and Gen Z probably, and maybe even some Gen X, and obviously this fluidity is like adulthood now is just like continued adolescence where you still haven't the adult version of an adolescent's disposable income, because like you can't buy a house, but like I can buy how many toys I want. I do have an allowance for that. Like where would you sort of express that? And like
I spend my pocket money on whatever I want.
Great,
I can have ice cream for dinner.
Exactly. But like, there definitely is that feeling. I think about it a lot where I'm like, especially as like a queer person, and we both have some income coming in. It's like, there are days where it's like, I'm just living a teen boy's fantasy, because it's like, I have my own place. I decorate it as I wanted. I can eat whatever I want. I can watch whatever I want. And it's just like, okay. And like, that can be a bit boring. And I don't think it's that sort of enriching of a life, but like, ultimately, like that's what it becomes. And like, you don't have these other things. I'm not saying that either is right or wrong, but I also think a big part of this as well is that the sort of bubble has burst on the early 2000s. And maybe we all sort of experience this in a way, having worked in various different media spaces. The bubble sort of burst where in the late 2010s and early, every business was like, Gen Z, we got to get Gen Z, we got to get Gen Z. Like, they have the biggest market, we got to get them, whatever. And I think businesses are pulling back now to be like, okay, like maybe they're not spending that much, or like maybe they're not that important or that powerful as far as like a buying demographic. And I think there's sort of like an adjusting to think more upward to the, because I think kidult specifically is a very millennial thing. And I think that is what this is responding to, is like, we're trying to court back the millennials and older who do have this sort of disposable income. I think a good example, and I think this is going to happen more and more, and is happening more and more. I'm not rewatching. I didn't watch it, but I'm watching season 3 of Hacks. And there's a storyline where like the Gene Smart's character is like, I'm too old. I can't do a late night show. And then it's like, you need to campaign on that. And then she does. And like, then it's a sort of like, the tail wagging the dog or whatever, where she sort of communicated that like, we need an old person can do this too. And then like, then the people who are like, well, we wanted a young people within the industry were like, yeah, actually we want an old person because of that thing. Because that older person can function across sort of like spending habits where the young person can't. And I think that's really it's happening.
It kind of reminds me of the Martha Stewart documentary, where she sort of has that renaissance and then she becomes relevant to a whole new audience.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, this is why James Bond is going to fix modern masculinity, guys. Just
chop. No.
Yeah. Well, all right. Listen, guys, we could obviously talk about all of these things, ad infinitum for days, but we have reached sort of the end of the broadcast window. Georgia, it's been a pleasure having you. Thank you for joining us. But before we go, is there any place that we should point people to find you, or anything particular that you've been working on that you think is, you want to preview for us?
A bit of self-promo. Yes, please.
All right.
So I have a podcast called Threads of Conversation, and also a newsletter by the same name. And you can find them the same place as everyone else's newsletter, on Substack. But you can also find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube now, which is exciting.
Hell yeah.
Fantastic. Well, sorry, Georgia, please go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, that's my main promo.
Okay, fine. Done.
Also, Georgia has a really good Instagram too, I will say. I love always something fun and interesting happening. Whether or not that's a part of the Threads of Conversation cinematic universe is, you tell me, but like,
I mean, obviously, I'm a millennial, so I still thirst for followers. So yes, you can find me at BFG_Graham on Instagram. It's a good follow. If you would like.
All right. I love it. Cool. Well, Georgia, thank you for being our second guest on Hip Replacement.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you'll come back and join us again at some point soon, as we get through another series of micro trend cycles that signal low social status.
Will I become the micro trend? The hip replacement
No.
micro trend
Let's
comes
hope
back.
not. Let's hope not. You're too perennial for that.
Thank you for having me.